programmer, at times I'm a reporter.
And as Ben mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about how we learn about arts education as the second largest district in the country. So we're going to show you how we took this data set, this very boring data, and turned it into this story, which focused on disparities across the district for arts education, and this database that allowed parents and readers to look up individual schools and see how many arts teachers they had, how many times an arts teacher was at their campus, how many students actually got arts instruction, and the percentage of time that they spent on arts instruction. And so I'm going to take you back a year ago to 2014. The district hired a new arts director named Rory Coolins. And Rory Coolins' job was to kind of assess arts across the district. What's wrong with it? What are we doing well? And so what he did was he created an arts equity index. And the way he did that was he sent out this survey. So he took a survey and came up with questions and said, I'm sending this to every principal across the district. And as you can see, some of the questions are, how many arts teachers do you have? How many full-time arts teachers do you have? And, of those students who get arts instruction, what do they get? That brings us back to the data set we saw at the beginning. So in March, at the end of March, Rory presented his findings to the LA Unified School Board. But if you look at the data, it doesn't really tell you much. It tells you an arts index score. So he took what he found and said, okay, Curtis Middle School, which is at the top, gets a score of a 7. But we don't know why. We don't know what happened and why they scored so low. So I went to Rory and said, we'd like to cover arts education, and we'd like to cover, what the reality is in the district, but we really need to see the data behind it. We need to see what you asked. We need to see, how you got to these grades. And that took some time. I mean, the district didn't initially create this data set to release to the public. And they understand that it's an open record, but they hadn't formatted it in a way that was readable. So it took some back and forth, and eventually we got this. And so this is kind of the summary that tells us this is what they looked at. They said, again, here's the number of full-time teachers, here's the arts instruction that people get beyond the regular school day, here's the percentage of the school's budget that's used for arts education. And so, once I had that data set, I went to Ryan, and we started working together.
Yeah, so these two columns are in our newsroom. They're maybe 15 feet apart.
Sorry.
But often, some of the news departments and the data desk don't collaborate as much as we'd like to. But this is kind of a success story that we want to talk about. So a little bit about me. I write a lot of Python code. I've been working a lot in pandas and matplotlib lately, and I work in this environment called Jupyter to write scripts. This is a little example of a Jupyter call and response right here, spitting out a plot that I'll talk about in a little bit. I really like this environment to do analysis, which is kind of what I do best. I also read a lot of R, which is kind of the lingua franca of statisticians, which I learned in school. Use it in RStudio, which is a GUI for R. R is really great if you're not familiar with it for statistical computing, like doing regression modeling. This is an example of those. So after Zahira got me these data, we're wondering what else can we tie it to? We'd like to explain these disparities in the context of other variables. So we were talking a lot, and we decided two factors we look at were student poverty and race and ethnicity. Luckily enough, the State Department of Education puts out these data files in a nice, clean format, and we're able to merge that in with our data. And this is kind of what the data looked like when we got it. It was about a dozen answers to a dozen questions, but codified in numbers in a weird Excel spreadsheet. It turned out that a lot of the sheets were hidden. Hidden within it was a data dictionary. Often when we run into data, we see this codified data. And there's a dictionary somewhere you have to ask for it or find it in this case. Once we tapped into the dictionary to kind of show the responses and the point values that correspond to those responses, we had a really rich data set that told a lot about every single school. But there were issues. Primarily, we didn't collect the data. We didn't go out and survey these schools. We didn't monitor the response rate. Although the response rate was really good, about a half dozen schools out of 750 did not respond to this. And we have to vet these other issues, like could principals have maybe misrepresented themselves to get something else from the district? Could they have misinterpreted the questions? And finally, this was a snapshot from the 2014-15 school year. We were going to put it out in the 2015-16 school year, so we had to kind of figure out what had happened in the interim. But we decided this data had to have integrity for validity. But one liberty we took was that there was a single question on there that we discovered doing our regular vetting of data that didn't have anything to do with arts education. It had to do with the socioeconomic makeup of the school's students. This was put in at the direction of Rory Pullins, the head of arts, whose aim was a little different from us. He wanted to direct funding to the media schools, and we wanted to just simply quantify arts education at the school. So we decided out of these dozen or so questions, we were going to take out that question and recalculate the data ourselves and analyze it that way. This avoids multicollinearity, which I will explain very briefly. One of the few terms I remember from stats classes. On the left, we have a scatter plot of poverty on the x-axis and the score in this arts index on the y-axis. So affluent schools are to the left and high poverty schools are to the right. And if you're higher on the y-axis, you fare better in this index. So just from looking at the line of best fit, there's a pretty strong relationship. The reason for that is multicollinearity. Poverty is on the x-axis, and poverty is also on the y-axis. So we decided, after kind of investigating the data a little bit, we were going to take it out. And this is what it looks like after we take out that single question and plot the same two variables. It's still somewhat significant in a relationship. It doesn't explain everything, though. So we wanted to figure out how we're going to cut the data in different ways to find insights for our story. So we know disparities exist, and we want to explain it through the data and even outside the data, which Zahira will talk about a little bit. One question proved to be really telling. It was this one right here on additional arts instruction. Whether this school had reached out into the community, formed partnerships with volunteers or nonprofit groups like LACMA or shaky, and leveraged that outside power to help arts instruction and provide something they could normally provide. Once we cross-tabulated that with the poverty data that we emerged in from the State Department of Education, it proved to be really telling. This is an example of how Zahira and I work together. At times we were sitting next to each other in a conference room, one computer on the code, one computer on the body of the story. And this is a little query right here from a Jupyter notebook, written in Python using this library pandas, where it's a simple cross-tabulation of this additional instruction question, whether a school answered yes or no, and the poverty rate for all the schools that answered in that way. So this is the query, and it led to this paragraph in our print story that said that these schools, the elementary schools that were linking up with outside help, they tended to be more affluent than the typical district school. LAUSD, it's about 75% of students are low income. But the schools that were reaching out tended to be more affluent schools.
So that brings us to what we did after we did the analysis. So, we've done the analysis, and now it's time to figure out if what we're looking at is correct. So we headed out to schools, and one of the schools we went to was Carlos Santana Arts Academy. And an important thing to know here is the district does not give arts academies any extra money. So just because it has the name Arts Academy doesn't mean that it has any more resources. So Carlos Santana Arts Academy was interesting to us because it had such a good program. It offered almost all the different arts, classes you could offer, but it had a very high poverty rate. So we decided to go out and figure out what was happening. So at Carlos Santana Arts Academy, we met the principal. And it turns out that she's a former professional dancer who had a lot of industry connections and was able to bring in a lot of outside resources that she couldn't, to cover programs and to teach classes that she couldn't teach with district money. And so she actually talked a little bit about how, yeah, she's been successful, but there are times that she had to go out and beg people almost and say, I can't pay you right now. I can't afford to pay you for this class, but I really need it for my students, and so I promise I'll pay you at some point. And people agreed. We also went to schools like Normandy Avenue Elementary, and Normandy Avenue Elementary kind of came in the middle of our analysis. They got a C, right?
Yeah.
They got a C for their arts program. And when you look at the data, Normandy Elementary seemed to have decent programs. I mean, they had an orchestra class, and they had some music, but when you get there, you see that it's a school of 900,000 students. That's a crazy school. It's a school of 900 students. And so 75% of those students were not getting arts education. And the principal talked about, in the orchestra class, they could only seat 60 students, so 60 out of 900. And the principal talked about how guilty he felt, because he said his kids went to a school where they had access to an arts teacher all the time. But he's the principal of a school where he knows that most of his kids don't have any access.
So we had kind of squared away our story and our analysis, and we wanted to do something else with it. We had a very rich, granular data set, first of its kind survey, so we decided to do two things. One was we were going to create an online website that had profile pages for the hundreds of public schools in LAUSD, so parents could use it as a resource and educators and those stakeholders in the arts. And we wanted to issue grades. So here I just talked about Normandy got a C. We decided to come up with a grading system so that we could add extra context to the data. Like we said, we got the data, it was just a bunch of numbers, this index calculation. We didn't really know what went into it, so we wanted to issue grades to hopefully communicate to readers this school stood among its schools because it was so much higher, so much lower. So we'll get into both of these. Producing the profile pages took a lot of work in Django. The data desk is a Django shop. I had never really done anything of consequence with it before, so this was a fun project to work on. If you don't know, Django is a Python-based web framework that kind of liaises between the database and HTML code to help you dynamically create lots of web pages. These two tutorials here, if you want to look at these links, Ben Welsh has planned both of these. Phenomenally helpful if you're a beginner and stuff. Really briefly, Django, the first step is to create models or database schema, kind of laying out what you have, and then populating the database. So here we laid out some basic information. There was an LAUSD ID, a school name, the answer to a question, the response, what that number corresponded to. This is a little code here. Grade, and then we loaded our database. And then we used Django's templating functionality to write just a handful of templates that would work across the scale of our project. It started at 600 or so schools, it ended up being more than 700 as we got new data. So a little bit about the templating. Two basic templates went to the bulk of this. One was this index template that was just the landing page you would go on, get a quick intro, a little grade breakdown, and some top 10 leaderboards. And the detail pages that worked across 700 or so schools, they had to be different for elementary and secondary schools, so we had to write a little Python code with Django to handle a bunch of cases. I'll get into these a little bit more. But on each template, we also had to kind of take out all the jargon of LAUSD's survey and present it to readers in a clear format so they could digest it in the best way. One of the things was like teachers were referred to as FTEs or full-time equivalents, which is a common term in the education world. We changed that to arts instructors, and then we had to get this text edited and copy edited and later translated, which we'll talk about also. This is a little snippet of code. I found Django to be great and phenomenally useful, and I just wanted to show this example. This is the top 10 table from the index page, and this is the code that went into it. So if you're familiar with programming or Python, this is a little for loop in the middle of a bunch of HTML code that is wrapped in Django tags. And it says for all of the secondary schools in the top 10, write a little bit of HTML code that plugs in the rank, the school name, and the grade. And just do that for a small table of 10. This is great because if your data change, you don't have to change your websites, you're not hard coding anything on the page. And another quick example is a little, we call this a robo-text paragraph. And I guess the data desk is known for algorithmically writing stories. And this is just a case of a paragraph. This is the code that went into it. It's kind of a Mad Libs kind of thing. School name scored some number out of some number point, experience on first and center education. We wrote this once. It worked for every single school. There's some logic in there that handles pluralization or using the word and instead of but. But after we wrote one template, worked for everything, which is kind of, I thought it was cool to show the power of Django. Next, we had to issue grades. So this is what the distribution of grades looked like after we took out that one socioeconomic indicator and recalculated it. They look like bell curves, or statisticians would call them normal distributions, with a kind of bell in the middle and a high end and a low end. So what we decided to do with that, this is from our methodology online, we decided to look at the standard deviation of each school to measure how far away it was from the middle. If you're not familiar with standard deviations, it is just that. It's a reflection of how far away you are from the middle, above or below, positive or negative. And we came up with this somewhat simple rubric that we thought was pretty defensible. If you were more than 2 standard deviations, which we found out to be at like 42 for elementary schools, or above the median, you get a grade of A. 1 to 2, you get a grade of B. Anywhere from 1 below to 1 above, you get C, which is this heavy middle. And anything more than 1 standard deviation below, you get a D. But one thing we had to consider, what about Fs? It was clear numerically on these history here, the low end did not go as low as the high end. And to put it a different way, it was clear there were a lot of elite art schools. But everyone kind of sank to a common floor. 0 is the lowest you could get on this art center score. So numerically, we had no real reason to give Fs. We wondered maybe there was a practical consideration. If you said on the survey that you didn't provide any arts classes, maybe that should be an F. But eventually, we decided not to give Fs. It was after a lot of discussions. Any criteria we came up with could have improperly assigned an F to a school. We mentioned a lot of issues with this data ahead of time. It was based on one question, and the principal misinterpreted that question. We could be giving an F where an F wasn't deserved. So yeah, we decided not to go with Fs. That's a little bit about our grades.
So, I, as a native Spanish speaker, I always pride myself on being the person who's like pushing for, finding ways to reach that broader audience. So that being said, I'm very embarrassed to say that this was not my idea. We were in a meeting with, Ryan and I were in a meeting with Ben Welsh, and he said, why don't we do this in Spanish? Which made a lot of sense. I mean, the district is 75% Latino, and we know that not all of those families are only Spanish speakers, but anything you can do to really reach that broader audience is important, especially on an issue like this, where we're really trying to give parents all the information they need to, advocate for their children.
So I'm just going to get a little bit technically about how we did it. We used Django's localization functionality. I am not terribly familiar with it. I know only as much as went into this project. A little bit about how it worked. We ended up writing a lot of HTML code and hard-coded in words like enrollment and low-income students and race and ethnicity that appeared on every single one of these 700 profile pages. In Django, you had to wrap these words in trans tags, would be the terminology here. And then, Django no computer does the translation for you. We have to sit down with the number of Spanish speakers that here are included, and our sister publication, OI, which puts out a Spanish language publication, in a room and figure out how we were going to translate these words. So Django, after we identified everything that needed to be translated, gave us a little file like this, a .po file. I'm not even sure what that file is. That said, okay, you identified enrollment, and enrollment could have appeared in hundreds of places on hundreds of pages. What would you like that string to say? We put in the Spanish language translation. It has to be custom to this project. Like the word rank could have the connotation of military rank or something like that. We wanted it to be kind of what we were looking at, ranking schools in a list. And then with a little bit of trickery that someone's smarter than me, we were able to prepend the URLs with EN or ES. And the main point here is that we didn't have to make a second separate website. The browser is just kind of able to tell Django, okay, we're in the English locale, we're in the Spanish locale, and represent the text in that language.
And before we move on, it's really important to point out that this is the first time that the LA Times has ever put out a Spanish language database.
And this is what the page looked like. in the end, very identical to the English page, with just Spanish words in place of English.
So why it matters. I think that when you look at the results of the story and the results of the analysis, a lot of it seems intuitive, right? I mean, the schools that struggled the most, whose arts programs struggled the most, were in high poverty areas. And, you know, outside donations and outside help really kind of bolstered other schools. But those schools were mostly in more affluent areas. So some of those things seem intuitive, but when you think about it, this is the first time that we were able to really kind of delve into the data and say, what does that mean? So in some schools, not having a good arts program meant having an orchestra class and not having any instruments, or not having an arts class, not having any arts at all. So we went to a school, Curtis Middle School, that for a long time chose to not have any arts because they were using their budget to provide Spanish and science electives. And so the disparities are so different when you see that, when you can actually really see that one school has art, music, orchestra, band, and another school has nothing. And I think this really kind of allowed us to show people this is why this matters. This is why, you know, you need to understand disparities. It's not just saying that, you know, a school has fewer resources. It's really understanding what those resources are. And in a way, it allows families to then go and look at, you know, their school and say, why don't we have this?
And I'll just say, to piggyback on that, Zahira mentioned that, you know, a lot of our findings were kind of intuitive, that the schools with lower income students tend to be the ones that provide the first education. But it means a lot more when data backs that up. You hear a lot of things anecdotally all the time, and we came to some maybe obvious findings, but bolstered by a pretty rich data set that was very detailed, and I think it's an example of the impact that we looked for that Ben mentioned. And I think we achieved it with this project. It was also kind of the message we wanted to send, that the collaboration also helped this get presented in the most readable format. You know, Zahira is very technically skilled. She could have written a great story. But I think collaborating brought out something hidden deeper in this project.
And I think, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think sometimes as journalists, we look at stories and we say, or potential stories, and we say, well, there's nothing new there, right? And I think that's a problem sometimes. Like in this case, the fact that there are these disparities, yeah, maybe that's not super new, but why do they still exist? You know, why after decades of trying to kind of find that balance, are we still seeing these disparities?
So that's it for us. With the content. Thanks for listening.